Hey guys, Peter here to do an album review. Today I'm here to tell you about the latest from Vreid, Wild Northwest, out April 30th on Season of Mist. This album has 8 tracks, 49 minutes in length, and this is the band's 9th full-length studio album. They are a melodic black metal band from Norway. For their 9th studio album, they decided to go with a concept that runs really deep. It affects the structure, the sound, the lyrics, the vocals. Everything on this album is there to serve the story that it tells. And it's a journey of life as it descends into death. Those two paths really become one. It's really hard to separate them. So as you follow the main protagonist of the story, sometimes the lines get blurry, not between life and death, but between reality and fiction. It's really hard to understand exactly where you are. And this makes the story a little bit more captivating. It allows you to feel a little bit of a stronger connection with it, because it plays really well into how we perceive our own life and how perhaps we've moved through our own journeys and our own stories and our own paths. So it's a very interesting approach, one that doesn't feel 100% fiction and obviously doesn't feel 100% real, somewhere in the middle. Now, as far as the structure of the album is concerned, it's what you would expect from a concept album. Peaks and valleys. Each song pulls you in a different direction. It offers you a different look, a different feel, a different way of coming together. And that's exactly what you need on an album like this. You can't have too many songs that sound, feel, or are put together in the same manner, because as you travel through life, as your own experience of life, you know that there's no two steps that you take that are exactly the same. Everything is always changing, everything is always evolving, and you have to adapt as you move along. This album, from a structural perspective, really paints that picture. It really gives you that feel. Having said that, as an album that it's not broken from that perspective, it doesn't really pull you that far off the path that you can find your way back. It does take you in different directions, it does give you different looks, it gives you different sceneries, if you will, but by the end of the songs, you always feel like you're coming back to that original road in which you started your journey on, and that allows the album to go into different directions, but still stay very compact and cohesive across all 8 songs. Once you get into the soundscape at the core of this album, I felt that rock and roll is really the predominant factor that really drives the sound, that really drives the experience. Nothing new for the band, but perhaps on this album is a little bit more noticeable in how the songs are constructed and how they impact the overall soundscape that the record has. Obviously, black metal plays a huge role because it infiltrates itself across every single song, and it impacts the way the tracks are put together, impacts the way the tracks sound, how they're recorded, and obviously how you feel about them from an emotional perspective, from an emotional drive, but also from a soundscape approach. But underneath the hood, this is a very rock and roll driven album with a lot of black metal elements, and I like the nuances that they created because it doesn't stay constant. As I said about the structure, this is an album that morphs, evolves, changes from track to track. The same could be said about the soundscape. It doesn't stay stagnant across all 8 songs. It moves, it derives, it changes, it gives you different feels, it gives different aspects to it, it gives you different layers and different depths depending on where you are within the story, and then obviously that soundscape is going to be the soundtrack of that moment in time within the story itself. Now, when you look at the big picture of the soundscape and you start to dive deeper into the little elements that really make it tick, in my opinion, there are 3 that are extremely important for 3 different reasons, and that is drums, keyboards, and guitars. First of all, I really like the drums on this album. I also like the bass. The two kind of have a similar role for different reasons, but I like the fact that they are very predominant, that they play an important part on the overall soundscape. They're not hidden at any time, but at the same time they feel very subdued, they feel very controlled. They play an important aspect in terms of creating depth of sound in order to create a foundation for the tracks, allowing them to navigate into different perspectives, but at the same time staying connected, staying in contact with each other, not allowing the tracks to really fall off the wagon, if you will, and keeping them moving in the right direction. So the sound of the drums, how it's executed, how it's put together, how it interacts with what the bass is doing, those 2 elements is like 1A and 1B. They play an important role, but they play an important role in terms of how they interact with each other, and then obviously what they offer to the songs themselves. The other element is the keyboards. I love what they did here because they offer you different feels, different looks depending on what song you're talking about, depending on where you are within the record. Sometimes it's just a layer of sound, it almost feels like a breeze. Sometimes it gives a little bit more darkness to the track, creating a little bit more atmosphere. Other times it comes in as a melodic touch that really enhances the overall spirit of the song and enhances the volume and sound that the guitars are putting into the forefront. So they're used throughout the record in different ways, in different manners, giving you different feels, giving you different perspectives, and changing the overall style and approach that the songs have, but always in a very subdued manner, and that's a really important approach. I never felt that at any given time that the keyboards were taking control of the songs and they were pushing the songs forward, they were the driver of the tracks. No, they're there as a layer, they add depth, they add all these different elements to it, but they always stayed in the background. They're very subdued, very controlled in how they're used and how they come across. Last but not least, the guitars. I really love the guitar sound on the album, and I love the changes that it has. Sometimes really graspy, sometimes a little bit rustic, sometimes pure rock and roll, just super driven, super clean in the sound and the approach, and sometimes a little bit more gritty. So there's a little bit of everything on this album. Once again, depending on where you are in the concept, where you are in the story, how the song is put together, you're gonna get a slightly different approach from the guitars. Sometimes a little bit more subdued, a little bit more controlled, sometimes a little bit more driven, pushing the song forward, really becoming the driver of the experience of the track itself. But the quality of sound stays consistent across 8 songs, regardless of where the guitars are pushing you, regardless of the style or approach in which the guitars are coming across. Those things change, but the quality of execution stays true on all 8 tracks. Last but not least, I have to talk about the vocals, because that's one of the most important elements, perhaps one of the most dynamic elements in this album, at least from my perception of this record. When you have a concept album, the vocals play the role in a very important one, because they're part of the storytelling aspect. You can tell the story with the music, you can tell the story in terms of how the songs are constructed, how they're created, and how they intertwine with each other. But you also need the vocals in order to bring some of those lyrics to life, in order to bring the character's experience to life. And I felt that they did that on this album with the style and approach and the diversity of styles that are present on the record across all 8 songs. You're gonna get harsh vocals, clean vocals, humming, backing vocals, female vocals. There's a little bit of everything for everybody, but I always felt like they came at the right time, in the right song, in the right place, in order to enhance the experience, in order to give something else to the track, in order to give some life to the track. And they didn't felt to me that they had one style, one approach, or that they were tied in to a specific way of doing things. They really wanted everything on this record to be as volatile as possible, as eclectic, as dynamic as possible, and not really fall prey to one size fits all. That is true of the soundscape, that is true of the guitar approach, and definitely that is true of how the vocals come across from the first all the way to the last track. Overall, I really enjoy this album. This is an album that searches for perfection, but it looks for perfection not necessarily in how things are delivered, but in the vision that spawned the idea behind it. That's where the perfection really lies. Sometimes you look at an album and you see, is this album perfect in terms of the soundscape that it carries and how it was recorded, the mixing, all of these elements. That's what you're looking at. On this album, I don't think that's the case. I think you look at this album and you judge it based on the vision that they had and how they executed. Did the vision come true? And if the vision comes true, then the album is a success. And that's how exactly I'm looking at this album, and that's how I'm measuring it, and as far as the success level and as far as good as this album is. Now, as far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Wild Northwest. This is the opening track, a song that's driven, but it comes at you in bursts. It's not driven from the beginning all the way to the end in a consistent manner. It stops, it goes, it stops, it goes. It has this kind of stop and go momentum all the way throughout, and that allows the song to be a little bit more dynamic. It allows the song to have peaks and valleys as you progress through it. The keyboards add an incredible atmosphere to how this track sounds and how this track comes across. The bass also plays a very important role because it adds depth of perception. It makes the song feel a little bit thicker. It makes the song feel a little bit wider, a little bit bigger. Not necessarily creating volume or making the song heavy, but just expanding the walls of the track, making the song feel a lot more robust than what it really is. And it also underlines a little bit of the darkness and the atmosphere that the track holds. The grittiness that you get on this song is mixed in with a lot of melody, and you're going to get those two worlds out of the guitars, sometimes super gritty, sometimes super melodic, but always intertwining them in the best way possible in order to make the song feel very continuous and not feel like the song is just like hitting speed bumps all the time, even though it's very stop and go as far as the drive that it has. Next, Dazed and Reduced, a great rocking sound song. This is perhaps one of the more rock and roll or pure rock and roll style tracks that this album has to offer. The clean vocals really interesting because they add a little bit of darkness. You would think that harsh vocals would bring darkness to the forefront, but no, for a song like this that's very rock based, very rock driven, using clean vocals for the majority of the track really works well because it makes the song feel darker without necessarily making the track feel heavier. That's kind of the dynamic that this song has, and it has great guitar sound all the way throughout. It has an incredible way of making the vocals sound very haunting at times, and then very penetrating in others. It migrates, it changes, it morphs. The same could be said about the sound, the same could be said about the vocals, but at the same time it doesn't go too far away from the beaten path. It stays very controlled, I would say, until the last 2/3 of the track, and then things change. There's a different atmosphere, there's a cool dull that resets the track, and it's done by the piano. The piano comes in and resets the song completely. It changes the perception of the track, it changes the soundscape of the track, it changes how you notice the track, how you feel about it, and it makes the second half of the track feel heavier than the first half. You also have harsh vocals that come in that second half that tie in or they partner it up with the clean vocals that were there before. So now you have two sets of vocals working together. That gives a lot more volume, that gives a sense of heaviness. So overall, that reset point that the pianos do towards the end of the track really make the second half of the song feel a lot more bombastic, feel a lot heavier, feel a lot bigger. But that's just perception, because at the end of the song you start to finish off the track with the same energy, with the same soundscape as the song started, going absolutely full circle. Last but not least, Into the Mountains, one of the most interesting tracks on this album. It starts off very driven. It's a pure black and roll song, if you will, from the moment it starts nearly to its end, but not to its end. There's a caveat here. So it's a song that has grittiness, very driven, moves well, both vocally and musically. The two really match well with each other. That grittiness is not just present in how the guitar sound, is also present in how the vocals are coming across. There's some female vocals as far as layers are concerned that it adds a different atmosphere to the track, it adds a different darkness to the song, and it really matches well the overall construction that the track has. And then suddenly, with 2 minutes to go on the track, the song completely changes. It goes in a completely different direction, becomes almost a pure electronic instrumental track, and it leaves you scratching your head like, what has happened here? It's a complete switch. It's a real Jekyll and Hyde vibe that this track has. It's a song that's almost made up of two different tracks coming together and breaking themselves apart and then merging again. It contracts and expands all the time. It just has a very interesting dynamic. It has a very interesting way of being constructed, and it has a very interesting way of coming across. When you listen to this song, if you heard it from the beginning, you would think the track would be one way. If you hear it towards the end, you think it's something completely different. So I like the style that it has. I love the dynamic changes that it offers, and I love the fact that they were able to merge two complete opposite worlds in one single song and still make this song as vibrant as it is. This is it. Wild Northwest, out April 30th on Season of Mist. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.